You may have heard many times that this case applies to people who were exposed to the water at Camp Lejeune between 1952 and 1987. And that's because that's the time when several wells and water systems at Camp Lejeune were highly toxic. After 1987, they switched to a different water system across the camp, and the exposure to the toxins was eliminated at that time. So that's why you hear 1952 to 1987. But that evidence is old. So how are we going to prove our case? Well, a lot of it is good old-fashioned investigative work. But the government actually has given us a head start. Many times in these big national litigations, you have a defendant on the other side who may be a corporation. And they may have done their own testing, but they're not telling people about it. And as a matter of fact, many times they may have hidden the results of those tests. Everybody remembers what happens with the cigarette manufacturers and that litigation many years ago. We all found out they knew a lot more about cigarettes than they ever let anybody know. Well, fortunately, now this law is passed, the government has opened its book on its own testing and its own modeling of the water at Camp Lejeune. And what we've learned is what we think the toxins were in the different well systems around Camp Lejeune at that time. These government models have been shared publicly now, and the government will accept their own models as evidence. So we've got a good head start in proving what was in the water and at what levels and when. On the medical side, much of the medical evidence may be old, but for those people who are still alive, they remember. And don't forget, your testimony under oath and the testimony of your family and friends is admissible in court. Not everything has to be a document that existed 20 years ago. You remember, I remember, your wife, your kids, your friends remember, and that's good enough. But also, much of this medical evidence is preserved. The government, through the VA administration, does have quite a bit of this evidence still available. And for those people who were diagnosed more recently, much of the hospital and doctor evidence is now digital. So yes, a lot of the evidence is old, but between the government records, the government testing and modeling that we now know about, and some good old investigative work that we're used to doing, we can put these cases together even if they're 20 or 30 years old.